Have you ever been told you were too much? Too emotional, too sensitive, too angry, too difficult to deal with? For most of history, that wasn't just an insult. It was a diagnosis. Doctors had a word for women who argued, grieved too long, wanted too much, or simply refused to be quiet. They called it hysteria. And the treatment wasn't therapy. It wasn't rest. It was removal, signed away by a husband, a father, sometimes a stranger with a medical license. No trial, no appeal, just gone. And the part that should unsettle you most, the criteria they used, sounds familiar. Let's start with a number. Between 1850 and 1900, admissions to psychiatric institutions in the United States and across Europe rose by over 300%. Most of the new patients were women. The hospitals had different names depending on where you were. The Illinois Eastern Hospital for the Insane, Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London, the one history remembers as Bedlam, the Salpêtrière in Paris, where a neurologist named Jean-Martin Charcot would eventually perform his famous public demonstrations, showing off hysterical women to audiences of men who paid to watch. The women didn't choose to be there. Most of them had been brought in by someone else. A husband filing a complaint, a father signing a form, occasionally a physician who had met the woman once, maybe twice, and had already made up his mind. There was paperwork, of course. There is always paperwork. But here is the detail that tends to catch people off guard. In many U.S. states throughout the mid to late 1800s, a husband could have his wife committed without a medical examination at all. His word was sufficient. His word, and the word he most commonly used, the word that appeared again and again in the admission records, was simply this: difficult. Elizabeth Packard didn't think she was doing anything dangerous. It was 1860. She was a mother of 6 living in Illinois, and she had started to disagree with her husband, a Presbyterian minister named Theophilus, about theology. Privately at first, then in a Bible study class. She said what she believed. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten anyone. She just refused to pretend she agreed with him. Theophilus had her committed. Under Illinois law at the time, a husband could institutionalize his wife without evidence, without a hearing, without her consent. She had no legal recourse. She had no voice. She was 36 years old, completely sane by any measurable standard, and she was placed in the Jacksonville Insane Asylum, where she would remain for 3 years. 3 years. And what had she done? She had formed her own opinions. But Elizabeth Packard's story doesn't end in that institution. And that matters, because it tells you something about what these places actually were. After her release, secured only because her husband briefly let her come home, likely believing she had been broken, she discovered he had locked her in her room and was preparing to have her recommitted. She managed to get a note to a neighbor. The neighbor alerted a judge. A trial was held. It took the jury 7 minutes to declare her sane. 7 minutes to undo 3 years. She spent the rest of her life lobbying for laws requiring jury trials before commitment. She succeeded in several states. But the machine she was fighting didn't stop. It adapted. Because hysteria, as a diagnosis, was never really about medicine. It was about management. The word itself comes from the Greek hystera, meaning uterus. The ancient Greeks believed the womb was a wandering organ, that it could detach and travel through the body, pressing against the lungs, the heart, the brain, causing irrational behavior. This was considered legitimate medical theory. By the 19th century, physicians had dropped the wandering uterus explanation, but kept everything else. The diagnosis expanded. Now it could mean almost anything. Excessive emotion, inappropriate emotion, insufficient emotion, sexual appetite that was too strong, sexual appetite that was too weak, talking too much, going silent, grief that lasted longer than a doctor thought it should. A woman in London was committed in 1878 for, and I want you to hear this carefully, causing annoyance to her neighbors. That was in her file. That was the medical justification. And the treatments. The treatments are where this history becomes something else entirely. Physicians prescribed isolation, extended bed rest, sometimes for months, a removal from books, from conversation, from any mental stimulation, the logic being that the female mind was too fragile for sustained thought. Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, one of the most respected American neurologists of the 1800s, developed what he called the rest cure. Women were put to bed. They were fed. They were not permitted to read, write, see friends, or leave the room. Some patients were on this regimen for years. Charlotte Perkins Gilman underwent the rest cure. She later wrote a story about it, The Yellow Wallpaper, in which a woman slowly loses her mind while being confined to a room by a doctor husband who believes he is helping her. Gilman said the story was not fiction. She said she came within 3 inches of losing her mind entirely. She got better only after she left her husband and went back to work. Her doctor called that a mistake. Here is where it gets harder to sit with. The women who resisted treatment were documented as more severely ill. If you argued with a doctor, that was a symptom. If you tried to leave, that was a symptom. If you cried, that confirmed the diagnosis. If you didn't cry, that also confirmed the diagnosis. There was no behavior a woman could exhibit that couldn't be folded into evidence of her instability. The system was not designed to release people. It was designed to receive them. Some women spent decades inside. A few spent the rest of their lives there. And the files, the ones that have been preserved and reviewed by historians, show something that is difficult to read without feeling it in your chest. The notes are almost never about what is wrong with the patient. They are about whether she is manageable, whether she is compliant, whether she is causing problems for the staff. That was the metric. Not her suffering, not her symptoms, not her recovery, her compliance, and a woman who asked too many questions about when she could leave was considered to be exhibiting signs of continued illness. So she stayed. There is something about this history that we tend to treat as settled, ancient, distant, a relic of a time before we understood things properly. But the last major revision of hysteria as a formal diagnosis happened in 1980. Not 1880. 1980. And the question worth sitting with, not answering, just sitting with, is what it means that difficult has always found its way into the language we use to describe women who don't make themselves easy to manage. What it means that compliance is still, quietly, treated as health. If any of this stirred something in you, share it with someone. Not because it's a good video, because some of this they didn't teach you, and maybe they should have. There are names in those old asylum records. Women with full lives and opinions, and grief and desires that someone decided were too much. Most of them no one remembers. I wonder sometimes if that was also the point.